Hi, so welcome to the magical mechanical month of May, a series of videos on robots, androids and the human condition. Now these have been chosen because they've either spoken to me in some way or have really interesting ideas, or in most cases a bit of both. So we're going to kick off with Chappie, which interestingly enough discusses the idea of evolution from the start. You know, the fact that Chappie has kick-started a new form of evolution, you know, in robotic consciousness. And I think that's quite interesting because I think this is the only one of the ones I've chosen and the only one I can think of that really sort of looks at it from that angle. And part of that evolution, you know, obviously comes with how we are now. How do we consider ourselves to be the pinnacle, if you will, that we are? You know, it's our rationalism, but that mixed with, you know, emotion and our moral grounding in most cases. And Vince obviously asked the interesting question, you know, can a robot be moral? He doesn't quite put it that way. When he's obviously trying to sell the idea of the moose, he's kind of saying, well, these decisions need to be made by a moral, rational human being, and probably someone who understands the concept of death. You don't want a SWAT team to go in just guns blazing, if, you know, because they don't understand the idea that you can't just fix people afterwards. I mean, whether the scouts know that and just don't care, I don't know. It's never really clarified. But an interesting counterpoint to this, if you're on the side of the fence that considers robotic or representations of people, as I've covered in Black Mirror videos particularly, are equal to people and passengers. You know, if you consider that those people, those things, for want of a better word, are equal to people, when they use them as shields, would that not be a good thing? Is that like using a human shield, which we, I think, can all agree is not a good practice? And one of the other interesting factors with this, of the ones that I've chosen, this is the only one where the AI developing to at least a simulation of human level consciousness was the expected result. In the other ones, and obviously we'll get to it, you know, it's generally an accident, it's not what was expected, or they've expected a certain level and it's exceeded it. And I mean, yeah, you could argue Chappie does exceed Dion's expectations in how well he develops that human-esque consciousness, and how that really informs how he interacts with people. But I thought it was quite an interesting difference to the others, and like I say, we'll get onto those, don't worry. But interestingly, Yolandi in this has, I suppose, a maternal trope, you know, in a lot of ways. Obviously she does refer to herself as mummy and Ninja as daddy, and she kind of really has, you know, she has this mother-son kind of bond with Chappie. She's proud in all his achievements, and she's very much a nurturing role model for him, in the same way that Dion also is trying to nurture the good parts of him, because, you know, children from the get-go are blank slates. There isn't any moral imprint on them. There isn't any social expectation imprinted upon them, and it's really in the early days. And obviously Chappie has a very, very accelerated, you know, equivalent to that growth, and the important factors in making sure that he's not just a homicidal maniac of a robot are Yolandi and Dion, giving him the love and nurture and, like I say, moral grounding. Ninja just sees him as a tool, and doesn't see him as another living being, because, that said, would he probably treat another human being the same way and just like, you know, I'm going to train you to be the baddest ninja, the baddest gangster, the baddest ninja as well. You know, he probably would, if we're honest, but I think it's even more so with Chappie because he doesn't see that there's an issue with it. And one of the other things that Dion does provide are the moral boundaries. You know, he says you can't do crimes, you know, and things like that, and that really does stick with him. It was imprinted early enough that you know, he doesn't want to go against it, and he's only convinced to harm anyone by being tricked that it would send them to sleep. That's the only way that he can accept it, and that shows the emotional manipulation of Ninja, which is quite strange. If he only sees him as a tool, would he emotionally manipulate him? But I think he does on some level accept that he's like a person, and with a person you can emotionally manipulate them, especially if they are somewhat naive. You know, we sort of see people with, you know, extreme sort of learning difficulties and things like that who unfortunately can be taken advantage of because their understanding of the world is twisted and very sideways to what everyone else's is, and that, as I say, can be abused by unscrupulous people. So it's good that Dion kind of forces himself into the situation and allows him to express the creativity in painting and things like that. But of course, I think one of the most heartbreaking moments in the entire film is obviously when Ninja and America take him out, and you know, the people just see him as a police droid and start basically abusing him. You know, it's a very heartbreaking and harrowing scene. It's very, very difficult to watch, because by that point you've kind of accepted that Chappie is a child for all intents and purposes. He's a child and he's being abused and beaten, and then of course Vince picks him up and it just escalates from there. And you know, one of the, you know, it's kind of a line that's perhaps mocked in a lot of places. I know I've done it in the past. No! Chappie has Chappie has only surely living things can have fear. Only things that have a sense of humanity, you know, or a sense of being alive, a sense of knowing that they're alive now and then they could stop living, can have that fear, you know, when they're being attacked or whatever. So that is further evidence of how human, in fact, Chappie really is. Now, I've mentioned sort of the nurturing aspect, you know, of Dion and Yolandi particularly, but I think in the consciousness programming there is something of his nature, his default, if you will, what he would naturally be doing. And I think the fact that he bonds strongest with Dion and Yolandi, and to a degree America's slightly kinder. He's almost like the bridge between Ninja's hardline, I want a kick-ass robot, and you know, Yolandi's treating him like he's a child. America's kind of like, as I say, that middle ground, you know, who's trying to be nice to him but encourage him into doing the heist. But like I say, he does appear to build the strongest bonds with the people who are nicest to him, and I think that's, if you could argue that there is a nature in the consciousness program, I think that's what the nature is. And it's through, I think, this nature that he learned, you know, when he learns about the idea of heart and soul and what it means to be alive properly, even though he has some kind of base level understanding, when he fully understands, you know, what it means, as I say, to be a living, wanting being. That's why he wants to save Mummy, you know. That's what inspires him. The idea that if he can have a heart and a soul, and that's part of his programming, then people's souls can theoretically be turned into programming. You know, it's where I think it's that's the core of where he gets the ideas for, you know, for what we see in the end. On the flip side, you know, this training by Ninja, it's almost just, I want the respect of Daddy. I want his respect. I want him to at least see me as an equal, or see me as a worthwhile person to have around. So I'll go along with it. I'll do the heist. I'll do it on my terms though. Again, it's still, I'll help you, but on my terms. And obviously, you know, with the promise of a new body down the line, obviously when his battery's failing. So I think it's quite interesting. The flip side, the relationships he forms strongest are those with the nurturing types. And of course, on the subject of the body, his difficulty with Dion, you know, his basically his crisis, you know, his sudden realization that he has an expiration date, if you will, like we all do. You know, we all have to come to terms with our mortality at some point. And you know, a lot of people who have, you know, terminal illnesses, or you know, where their bodies don't work as they ideally should, you know, and their quality of life is severely limited. They've, you know, this question has been asked a number of times. Why would the maker make me flawed? Why would someone who created this life make it with such, you know, such a big thing wrong with it? And even, like I say, not counting that in, just the general idea of the fact that we are all going to die, when we come to terms with that, you know, some find it a massive existential crisis of why are we here if our only purpose is to die at the end of it? And I think this is something very interesting in Chappie's consciousness. I refer to that as the program name. His sense of self, his being, his soul, if you will, is such that he can understand the idea of oblivion at the end of life. It does really reflect back on us. I think this is one of the key moments in the film that really is a reflection of what people growing up experience as well. And we see, that the people will go to extreme lengths in real life and obviously in the film, to avoid death. If there's a way around it, including Chappie. Chappie is very human, in the sense that he doesn't want to die, he doesn't want to expire. So, like I say, he goes along with the heist, and of course then it all goes belly up when Hippo gets involved and the moose gets released, and all the scouts are taken down by Vince. So then we get into like the sort of final part of the film, which is the redemption arc, really. Ninja does get redemption, I would say. He's been, just, I want to use this tool to commit the heist and pay off Hippo, but live comfortably after that. Maybe move away, whatever it may be. Have the wonderful Zeph life. Look that up. And of course, he says get away, and he redeems himself by being selfless. One of the great things about a good moral being is the selflessness that can come from that, and Chappie shows it. And in a way, I think Ninja learns that from him. He sees what a robot is willing to do. He's not even a real person. Even if he doesn't accept that he's as conscious as he is, that Ninja accepts that Chappie has the same level of consciousness. He still learns from him the idea of being selfless to a degree. Yolandi's obviously at risk as well, and that's going to factor in because he clearly does care for her. But he does redeem himself quite nicely there, and it's a shame that he survives in some ways, because it would be a nice sacrifice. It sounds awful, but it'd be a nice sacrifice for him, if they got away and everything like that, and then he was made into a consciousness. But of course, Chappie didn't have that relationship with him, so it had to be Yolandi, so that they could find the flash drive with her mind on it. There is the idea that, are we just in our minds? When people say we have a skeleton inside us, is it the other way around? Do we have a skeleton actually outside of us? If what makes us is housed just in here, in the mind, but the mind is a concept, the brain is an organ, the mind is a concept. And this is what, is difficult to sometimes grasp, I think, but when they're digitizing the consciousness of Yolandi, is that all that makes her her? Is that body that we see at the end, the robot body, the version of her at the end that's been created as a replacement, as it were, is that going to be exactly like her? Or is there going to be something different? Just because Chappie has a consciousness doesn't mean that it's going to work out. I know with Dion, he seems to be like himself. But that's just one thing that I think is a little more fantasy than scientific fact for me. But either way, it's an interesting idea. And, we sort of look at the idea of transhumanism to some degree with this. The fact that not only is Chappie, if you will, close to a human consciousness in a robot body, but obviously when he puts Dion and Yolandi into these bodies, he's then effectively creating transhumanism. There is a human consciousness in a robot body. It's not one that's like a human, it's not a simulation, it's a real human consciousness in a robotic body. This is transhumanism taken to the extreme, where everything apart from just your consciousness is manufactured, is artificial. And, I think this is where the idea of evolution really comes in, because now, if it's possible for people to be put into robot bodies, we are choosing our own evolution. We can choose what robot body we have. Do we want ridiculously durable skin? Do we want to be able to jump 50 feet in the air from standing? We can have these features. We can tailor how we are, and that's really interesting. One of the other sides, if you will, of this kind of robotic evolution is now we have the concept of eternal life. In theory, we could live forever. That's entirely feasible. And somewhat scary. I think the idea of living forever is romanticised a lot, but I don't think that it would be that great, you know. But then part of that is because you'd see people you know and love die. Now, if they chose also to upgrade, then you wouldn't have to see them die, so maybe it wouldn't be so bad. But it's one of those questions that, you know, like a lot of things, you know, I don't always have the answers. I'm never going to say that I've got all the answers. I like sort of, you know, thinking on it, and I think with this, you know, as I say, it is food for thought. You know, would it be a great evolution to be able to put ourselves into robot bodies, to live forever, not have to worry about, you know, work and eat, you know, eating, sleeping, anything like that. We could just do whatever we wanted. But like I say, would it be boring? I'm drawn to Shakespeare, you know, if all time were leisure, it'd be just as bad as if all time were work, paraphrasing there. But it's the same idea. But this is what Chappie gives us. You know, Chappie gives us the idea of evolution through transhumanism. The idea that a robot can potentially show marks of a human and can then choose to bring humanity closer to him. Now, the rest of these videos, without sort of going into, you know, next week's this one, but the rest of these videos are going to be looking more in, what about a robot that more wants to be human? You know, it doesn't want to sort of bring humanity closer to it, but it wants to get closer to them. So I'll be back next week with both short circuits in one, something a bit more light-hearted than this. So until then, as always, take care.